All right. Looks like we finally got this figured out. Hello, guys. Welcome. I am Bart Johnson, a cinematographer and YouTuber, but my guess is that if you're here, you probably already knew that. So we are live again on Saturday for my weekly Saturday show. However, we're a bit later today than we were scheduled for. So the regular 1 p.m. time, it seemed like there was some issues with YouTube's server, and I just couldn't get it done. But I knew I had all this content ready and I wanted to get it out, so I rescheduled it to 8. So if you guys are joining us live, thank you so much. I appreciate you sticking with me as I waited it out, got everything fixed. We seem to be doing pretty good now. So of course, guys, this is a live show, and the benefit of a live show is that we get to chat. So if you are joining live here, please feel free to chat in the comments, and I will occasionally bring our chat up onto the screen here. And I see we already have somebody in here. It's about time someone set the record straight for vlog. So you're really putting a lot of pressure on me right out of the gate there, but I will try to do my best to explain log in general today and all that. And I knew that my first question was going to be about the beer. It was a stressful day with the show not going live when it was supposed to, and then we went house hunting and all that kind of stuff. So I just got home a little while ago, and on my way back I picked up some of my just go-to sipping beer. It's New Belgium Fat Tire, so it's a Belgian style ale. It's almost kind of more like an amber lager with a little Belgian twist to it. But I figured it's 8 o'clock on a Saturday, we're doing a show, why not have a beer with everybody? So if you've got one, cheers. But anyway, moving right into it, as MPEG XSVCD, I'm not sure how to say your name, that's quite a lot of consonants in a row there, was mentioning, this show is going to be about log recording. So he specifically mentioned Vlog, which is the Panasonic version of log, but basically all different camera manufacturers now have their own version of log recording. Sony has S-Log, Canon has C-Log, DJI has D-Log. There's a ton of that, but not a lot of people understand what log is, why you would use it, when you would use it, and when you definitely should not use it. So I'm going to go over a bit of that today, and hopefully clarify some of this stuff and help you guys shoot better log footage or know when it's really not necessary. So let's start talking about log. So a log profile is a picture profile that you set on your camera, and it basically changes the way that your camera interpolates the information and data and gamma data that's coming into it, light basically. And a lot of people call it a flat picture profile. And while technically that's true, the image that comes out ends up looking very flat. There are flat profiles out there that aren't necessarily log, and I'll get into that in a minute too, bear with me. I'm not going to go super technical on this, guys, but I do want you to have at least a basic understanding of what's going on with log. And so a lot of times people shoot in log whenever their camera has it because they say they want their footage at the end to look cinematic. And it can. And log has a few benefits that does give you some advantages in terms of dynamic range that gives you that cinematic look. One of the key aspects of cinematic footage is that it has a really wide dynamic range. You know, you can see everything in the shadows, you can see everything in the highlights, and so that kind of comes across as cinematic, and log can help you do that. And I'll talk about how that happens. So, you know, the other benefit is that idea of really getting the most dynamic range that you can out of your sensor. Now, it's not going to make your camera go beyond what its sensor is capable of, but basically it's going to sort of optimize it and help you. So if your camera shoots, you know, has 12 stops of dynamic range, 12 stops that it can handle from darkest to lightest, using log, a log profile, isn't going to make it like 15 or something like that. But what it can do is it can help make sure that you're holding as much detail as you can within those 12 stops. So there's that. The other thing that people use log for, and even just flat profiles, is when they know that they want to customize their image in post-production with color, color correction and color grading, using LUTs and stuff like that. Basically, if you want to handle all of the color information, maybe even putting on a stylized look for your footage, usually log gives you the most flexibility to be able to do that and tweak it. But if you're someone who wants to just shoot it and have it, use it straight out of camera, it's not going to work. Log doesn't look very good. It looks mushy. And so without further ado, let me pull up some examples for you guys here. Let me just get my Premiere brought up and booted up, and we'll start going into what I'm talking about. All right. So here we go. We're in Adobe Premiere, and I've prepared some samples for you guys to sort of go through the different aspects of log and what it is. So first, let's talk about what log means at all. So log, L-O-G, why do we call it that? Well, it stands for logarithmic. So if you took trigonometry in high school or anything like that, you may remember logarithmic curves. So let's take a look at this here. I'm going to bring this up. And just full disclosure here, guys, I did not create these graphics. I have borrowed them from a gentleman named Casey Ferris, who runs a fantastic website called groundcontrolcolor.com. And he did a really good article about when to use log as well. And I kind of borrowed these images because they were just so great. So definitely go and check out Casey Ferris' stuff at Ground Control Color. I have a link to the article down in the video description, but he also does a lot of stuff with LUTs and all that kind of stuff if you're into that. But anyway, moving right along with that disclaimer out of the way. So the way that a linear curve works is when you're shooting in sort of a standard profile in your camera. So your lightness values just go straight up in a straight line, right? Just like that. So when you're using a logarithmic curve, what's basically happening is there's a logarithmic algorithm being applied to the way that your camera detects light and gamma. And this is what a logarithmic curve looks like. So what basically happens is stuff gets sort of shifted around, and the shadows start coming up a little bit. The highlights are saved and sort of stretched out. And so this is kind of what happens. So let's look at it in actual specific camera terms. Again, from groundcontrolcolor.com, article is down in the description. I want to make sure I give him credit because this stuff is fantastic. So if you're doing linear recording, which is just standard recording in the standard profile, this is what happens. You have black, gray, and what Casey calls crazy bright. And then, so that's what the camera sees. And then these are your values of what's actually being recorded here. So as you go up in the linear curve, you're okay, everything's, basically 1-to-1 where it is when it matches up and goes straight through. But then you start getting up to the highlights point and you reach the top of your camera's dynamic range. So it's too bright, it's over the brightest value that your camera can record, and it just plateaus, and all that's recorded is white. There's no data there, you can't get it back. And so you want to be able to hold more of this information all the way from black all the way up to those crazy bright values. But how do you do that? So using a log profile can help you to do that. So what's happening here is, like I said, this logarithmic curve goes up, and he has a note here. The dark stuff is recorded a little bit lighter, so it's boosted higher than it would be here. So your shadows are a little bit brighter here, and then everything starts tapering off, and it holds all of those brightest highlights just beneath the brightest value that your camera can record. So you're able to obtain more dynamic range, or rather the full extent of the dynamic range, but you end up with a kind of wonky looking image and what we call a flat image. So let's go ahead and take a peek here. So I have an example here. So here we go. I went out into my neighborhood And I shot this scene on the Panasonic GH5, and I used the Vlog L profile. Again, that's Panasonic's version. V is for Vericam. On the GH5, it's Vlog L because it's Vericam Lite. We don't get the full version. But anyway, this is a log shot. And the reason I shot this in log is because this has a little bit of everything in it. We've got these trees over here in shadow, and then we've got bright direct sunlight, and we've even got some sky and some clouds and some whites over here. Okay? So that's shot in log. And I exposed that for log. And without changing any of the settings in the camera, without changing the exposure, the ISO, the shutter speed, anything, I didn't change a thing. Setting it to a standard linear profile, this is what came up. Whoa. So again, nothing has been touched in terms of the exposure. The camera is receiving the exact same amount of light and exact same amount of information, but look at all this that's blown out up here. This is all gone. This is all that stuff that we were talking about in here, where it hits the brightest value and then it's just white. It's gone. So this is all gone here. Okay, so let's take a peek at what's happening. So let's go to color real quick. So we can see here, we have our range here. This is our luma. We have 0, which is black down here, and we have 100, which is white, pure white, up here at the top. And as you can see, most of our values are all the way up here, and we're clipping. We're hitting a hard line here. The camera can't go past it. There's a lot of stuff that's completely gone, and that's all this stuff up here. But now let's take a peek at what happens with the log. Okay, so here we go. We've still got some stuff that's not going above, so it might be clipped a little bit up in here. But do you see what's happening? Everything is held between this 80 and roughly 20% line. So your shadows are all lifted up, so there's nothing down near 0. Everything is brought up a little bit, and everything is down a little bit. So everything is held within this range, which will then allow you to color grade and stretch this back out and retain detail and all that stuff, because there's far less clipped, there's far less information gone in this than obviously in this. So let's take a peek here. So I went ahead and graded this, and if we turn this on, boom, that's what we get. So this is a grade that I did to it. We can see here we've got all of our information in our shadows. We can see colors, everything's looking good. And we can see all this stuff that's in direct sunlight. And while we may have a little bit of clipping in the clouds and stuff up here, I mean, look, we can see blue sky, we can see detail, we can see definition. All that is gone here. So these are exact same exposure. And this is gone, or sorry, this is preserved because I was able to stretch all of this back out with color grading, and all that information was held in there. So there we go. That's a basic overview of sort of like what log is and how it works and what some of the advantages are. You can really clearly see with that example that given the exact same exposure, the log was able to retain so much more information all the way into the highlights and into the shadows, rather than the linear curve standard profile was. So we got a question here. How is a curve linear? That's a very good question. I guess it would technically just be a straight line. So no curve, but linear curve, logarithmic curve, it's just naming conventions. But yeah, it's basically reading everything in a linear fashion as opposed to reading it in a logarithmic fashion. So let's take a sip here and let's dive back in and keep moving along. Okay, so we've seen that. Now, I had mentioned before this idea of using log for scenes that have high dynamic range. What's meant by that is that there are some very, very bright values in the scene, and there are some very, very dark values in the scene, and you want your camera to be able to sort of see everything. And a lot of times that's difficult. But if you have a scene that has those values in it, a log profile can be of a huge benefit. This is a time when you should be using logs. So let's take a look at some examples here. So here I have an interview that I shot. So we've got this interview here. We have this gentleman. He owns a southern food, soul food, Louisiana kitchen in Forney, Texas. And I was interviewing him in his restaurant. And so we have a lot going on here. So we obviously have some darker tones. You know, we've got shadows over here. You know, we've got stuff that is easy to expose here, but I also have these windows in the back. And while I didn't necessarily want to see everything outside of those windows, I didn't want them to just be completely gone. So this was a prime time to shoot in log. So let's take a look at what's happening with the color. So here we go. You can see once again, there are no complete zero blacks, meaning the shadows are being lifted. I do have some clipping on those windows just because of the limitation of the GH5 sensor. You know, if I had a camera that had like, you know, 15 or 16 stops, like if I had shot this with my Ursa Mini, this would, you know, keep going. But for this situation, it's fine. But you can see there's a big range, but everything is held. Nothing is completely gone over 100 and nothing is down near 0. So with a color grade placed on that to move all that back out, boom. We get a really nice looking shot. And you can see here that our values are now spaced out, and I have complete control over this. I can raise my shadows, I can darken my shadows, I can drop the blacks so that we can actually get it down to perfect 0 if we wanted a true black in the scene. So I have a lot of control here. But look, even though we've got some clipping, we still have detail outside these windows. They're not just white. There's still information there. And if we turn the grade off, I mean, look at that. We can see that. And yeah, we can't see as much when we grade it and stretch that back out towards 100% white, but that's a prime example. It looks really good. So let's go ahead and move to another example here. So here we have another example. This is, I was doing a ride along with a police officer in Lynchburg, Virginia. This is again a GH5 shot. And I shot this in log, especially because if you take a look, we have dark shadows and everything in the interior, and then it's bright sunshine outside. So I wanted to make sure that I could have the best chance possible of preserving information in both, shooting both at the same time, which is something that's really difficult to do. So we have his shot here. You know, he goes along, waves to some community members. Nice. And so let's go up. Let's put our grade on it. Boom. There we go. So all this information is stretched back out. I stretched it back out through grading. And this one's actually pretty good, at least at this particular frame. Nothing is actually super clipping out. Again, this is GH5, so it's not perfect, but if you look, we hold a lot of that information, and this just wouldn't have been possible if we weren't shooting this in log. A standard profile you would have had to either choose expose for outside or expose for inside. Using log, I was able to expose for both. So let's take a look at one more. So like I said, a lot of different things have log. This is a drone shot from my DJI Phantom 4 out in Sedona, Arizona, about 2 years ago. I say that because as of a year ago, last time I was there, it is now a no drone zone. But I managed to get in there before they completely banned them and got some shots. So this is using D-Log on the Phantom 4, but it works the same kind of way as log on any other type of camera. So log is going to be the same sort of theory, no matter whether you're using big cinema cameras, mirrorless cameras like the GH5, or if you're using a drone. So this is in D-Log, and as you can see, once again, nothing is at 100% white, and nothing is at complete 0 black. All of the information in the entire scene is held in this sort of middle range because of that log curve. And what that means is that these shadows have been sort of lifted up And these highlights have been sort of tapered and brought down to be held in there. It looks like with this one's pretty good. It looks like everything is pretty much held in there. No clipping on either end. So throw a grade on that. And boom, we get a lot more back. And I could push this even farther. So what I did here is I made sure that I didn't bring my shadows and blacks all the way down to 100 because I wanted to see some detail here in these shadows under the mountain. And so we get this great looking shot, all thanks to shooting in log. There's no way that I could have held this and this. So let's go pop back up for a sec, sip a beer, and stop by the chat. So let's see what we got here. Nth degree aerial perspective. What's up, everybody? What's up? How you doing? Cheers. I'll drink to that. Thank you for joining. And again, guys, if anybody else is in there and has any questions along the way, please feel free to go ahead and leave a comment. I do have my feed going on here, and we'll also have it, like we do up on the screen. And I'll make sure that we do a little Q&A. And if you have any questions along the way, I'll try and clarify those. But let me take a sip here. Good old Saturday night. All right, so I'm going to get us queued up for our next segment. Okay, so back into Premiere. So like I was saying, guys, the benefit of log is that if you have a high dynamic range scene and you have a camera that has log capabilities, that's where it really shines. That's where you want to use that. That's where it's going to give you the benefits and the capabilities. And so when you're shooting log, there's a few things that you need to know. A lot of times you're going to be looking at this really flat image, and you need to know how to expose it properly because it's not like exposing normal stuff. So here we go. We have this shot here. And we've seen this one before. This is the one that I shot outside of my house. And yeah, so shot in log. But now how did I expose this properly on the camera? Because this is what I was seeing. This is what I was seeing on the screen, is this washed out thing. So how do I know that I'm getting it right so that when I grade it, everything looks right? Well, there's a trick called exposing to the right. And what that's referring to is your histogram. So as you can see here, this is as I was shooting that, and I'm using the histogram on the camera, and you can see most of the values are shifted over to the right hand side. Now that's where your brights are, where your brighter values and your highlights are. Your dark values and your shadows are back over towards the left side of the histogram. So exposing to the right is generally a good idea with log. So I'm saying generally because different types of log on different cameras like to be exposed differently, but for the most part I find that overexposing them, where your camera is telling you, hey, this is too bright, is the way that you want to do it. And the reason for that is because, remember, we're bringing our shadows up. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we get our shadow information away from 0 as much as we can without clipping off our highlights at the top. So we want all of our information to move as bright as we can without starting to lose stuff in the highlights. So let me just talk about this. So yeah, we want everything as high up as we can without clipping the highlights as best as we can. And the reason for that is because when we grade it, we pull those shadows back down. And so a lot of times with log, people complain that with their footage, the shadows are too noisy because they say there's noise in the shadows and it doesn't look very good. But if you expose to the right and basically overexpose it a little bit on purpose, then when you bring it back down in grading, it'll crush those blacks and those shadows back down a little bit, and it'll eliminate a lot of that noise. So that's a common thing that people complain about with log, is that the shadows get so noisy. And that's because they're shooting it with their shadows at 0, and then they're getting a lot of noise and information in there. You want to bring those up. So you want to expose to the right. You want to bring all your information as high up as you can without clipping highlights. You want to try and preserve them as much as you can. So let's go back in here and I'll show you some stuff here. So this obviously was my histogram there, but sometimes you have other tools available to you for monitoring. So here you go. This is what I'm talking about. As I was shooting this, you can see that the GH5 in particular is telling me that I'm about 1/3 of a stop overexposed. So I have found that for Vlog L on the GH5, usually about 1/3 of a stop overexposed is the sweet spot for me. So let's move along here. So another option to help you do this is using something like a monitor or a recorder like an Atomos Shogun or any other monitors that has waveforms and histograms that will help you to see where your values are. So here you can see I'm shifting the values a little bit. Another one of the benefits of using something like a Shogun or a lot of the Atomos recorders is that you can also load LUTs in, so you can actually view on the monitor your already sort of pre-graded footage, so it'll help you expose and stuff. But that's a whole nother venture. I could dive down into LUTs. I don't want to dig into LUTs super hard in this one. I just want you guys to understand logs. So there are tools to help you, but the general rule that I find is expose to the right. So let's dive back in here. So as I was mentioning, guys, a big thing that you want to do is protect your highlights. So yes, you want to boost those shadows up. You want to overexpose by however many stops is best for your camera. You know, sometimes I've heard that S-Log is almost a full stop sometimes. I've found on the GH5 that it's about 1/3 of a stop. But you also want to watch the top, your headroom, because you're gonna end up clipping some of your highlights. So let me show you one where I didn't do that good of a job. So here is an interview with the mayor of Taylor, Texas. They're actually down in the Hurricane Harvey path, so I hope they're doing all right down there. But you can see, well, it's shot in log, and I needed to shoot in log for this situation because he was in shadow with some lights, all the lights I had blasting on him, and we had this background. But even still, a lot of this information is gone, and let's see exactly how much of that information is gone. So yeah, you can see there's a lot. So while I did great at keeping the shadows up and away, yeah, I lost a lot of detail in here, and that's not going to come back. Even log can't save you from that. So here's a grade on it, and that looks pretty good, but you know, I'm always forever going to be kicking myself that, you know, all of this information and detail back here is gone. And most people won't notice, but if you're going for something, you know, if you're going to use log to try and keep all that dynamic range, that's something you want to try and do. It's just, this was a tough scene, and the GH5 really couldn't handle the full dynamic range from, you know, his skin tones all the way to the bright sky in this one. But moving right along, let's take a look at a good example. So this is a good example. This is again down in Texas. This is a drone shot. We were, I was shooting in Terrell, Texas, where Jamie Foxx is from. And as you can see, I did a perfect job on this one of keeping the shadows up, overexposing a little bit, and nothing is clipping. The white here stays, everything looks good. And so what happens when we do that is if I color it, boom, that is a nice looking shot. And as we play through it, let the drone get into position, as I've stretched everything out all the way from 0 to 100 here, it's going just fine. Ooh, that's beating my CPU up a little bit there, that drone footage. Make sure we didn't crush everything here. No, we're still good. Okay, but you get the idea. So let's go over here and take a peek at this. So this is another prime example of where I did not protect my highlights. Take a look at this over here where the sun is. All of this is completely gone. So I raised up the shadows, I got detail in here and everything, but this is just gone. And even with a grade on it, it gets almost even worse. This is just pure nothingness. But now let's move to a better example. So this, I did a few changes to my exposure, messed it around a little bit, and got the same shot. And look, we got a few points in these clouds that are probably getting up towards the top of the range. But for the most part, everything is within the range where I want it. And if I grade this one, yeah, we can see everything from the detail in these trees to these clouds way off in the distance. So that's just fantastic. So that's what I mean, guys, by protecting your highlights. So protecting your highlights is always important, because once that information is gone, it's gone. You're not getting it back. So you do want to overexpose by as much as proper for your camera's log type, but you want to try and preserve those shadows as well. And so cameras with higher dynamic range sensors, stuff like the FS7 and Ursa Mini, yeah, they'll have a lot more flexibility because they have a few more stops of dynamic range available to them. Stuff like the GH5, which I believe is about 13, which is actually really, really good. Some of these extremes, it can't handle it. And drone footage, specifically drone footage like, this, sometimes it just can't handle that range, even with log. So there you go. Okay, so let's go to the next tab. I've told you what log is, how it works really well for high dynamic range scenes. Keep that in mind. How to work on exposing to the right while also protecting your highlights as best as possible. Let's talk about when there's no need for log. And I have nothing here because I don't have any examples of when I've shot log and didn't necessarily need it. Not patting myself on the back, but this is something that I want to tell you. So you do not need to shoot log all the time. It's not necessary. Log works best for those high dynamic range scenes. So if you have a scene that is just completely evenly lit, well lit, no dark spots, maybe you're just covering something in a conference room or something like that, and everything is very evenly and well lit, there's no need to shoot in log. All you're going to do is give yourself a lot of extra work to do in post, because you're going to have to grade that footage and get it to look the way you want. Now, maybe that's what you want to do. Maybe that's definitely what you want to do. Maybe you want to shoot it flat because you want to match it to some other footage that you're stylizing. That's fine. But you don't, for the most part, need log in that situation. Now, another time where you really don't need log and it will actually hurt you is in low light. So, like I said, what we're trying to do with log is we're trying to overexpose it a little bit and bring those shadows up. Well, eventually, if something is too low light, you're going to have to start using ISO to boost that up. If your lens is all the way open, your shutter speed you can't adjust anymore, and you're going to have to start doing ISO, and all you're going to start doing is introducing a lot of noise. And also, like I said, log in the shadows can tend to be noisy as it is. So if you're shooting a low light scene, there's really no need to use log, because you're going to end up with noisy footage, whether it be from just the nature of log boosting those shadow values, or whether you have to introduce some higher gain or ISO just to get your exposure correct. It's best to avoid. Now, if you have a dark scene where you have some really bright light sources, or it's something that you're lighting, you can try it and you can mess with your exposure and see if you can find that sweet spot where you're keeping everything in there. But for the most part, log is really poor in low light situations. So let's see here. I'm not sure how many people we have on here. It is Saturday night and all, but I will put this out there again. Please, guys, feel free to comment and ask any questions that you may have along the way. I'm just here drinking a beer, and we're moving our way right along through. Okay, so this next part I want to get into is I really want to get into, I've talked about grading and talking about getting these end results, but I've kind of just been doing a one-click because I've already pre-done it. So I want to go through and grade a few clips with you guys so that you can see generally how it's done. I'll do one using a LUT, and then one I'll try and do sort of manually. LUTs are something that I will talk about in a future show, but if you do have any immediate questions, please go ahead and pop them in the chat. John Cheerson, first-time watcher, digging the info. Well, thank you for joining. I'm glad you found it, and hopefully all this is useful. So let's go ahead, and we will get right in here. Okay, so like I said, I've been mentioning grading the entire time and have just been dancing around it because I did it all in advance. So after you've shot this footage, what do you do with it? You've got this flat image, you need to make it look the way you want it to look. So I'm going to do it here in Premiere using two different techniques, and we'll see what we can get here. So here I have a shot with the chief of police of Lynchburg, Virginia here. This is shot on the GH5. Been using the GH5 a lot lately, if you haven't noticed. And shot in Vlog. So let's take a look at what we got going on. We're going to go to our color tab in Premiere here. And we can see I did a pretty good job with this one. There aren't any super bright highlight values or anything, so I didn't really clip anything. And I held everything in the range pretty good. So let's go ahead and let's take this one manually and see if I can give him a nice look. So the first thing I want to do here is I'm going to go into my basic correction tab, and I'm going to be using these tools right here. And so what I'm going to do first, let's see here. First, I'm going to play with the exposure. So I'm going to bring him up a little bit. I don't want to go too crazy with it, but I'm going to boost it just a bit to move all this stuff a little bit more. So exposure will shift everything as a group kind of up. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in some contrast. And contrast is going to do the opposite. It's going to start to stretch stuff out. So you can see the highlights are starting to move towards white, and the darks are starting to move towards 0 or black. So that's 100% contrast. That's quite a bit, but that's all right. Well, actually, let's back it off a little bit. I'll put it down here because we'll use these to sort of perfect it. So let's see here. Highlights. The highlights are just going to stretch the top portion of everything over here and start pulling everything towards the highlights. So let's bring the highlights up a little bit. I don't want it to go to pure white anywhere because nothing in here is super, super bright. I want some detail in the flag, and I want some detail in here. So I'm going to bring those highlights up. And this is probably where I want my highlights to live. They're a little bit over 90%. Call it 95% is my brightest. Here's 100, which is pure white. So I think I like where they're living right there. So now let's go to my shadows. You know, we've got some shadows down here, we got some shadows here. Not a whole lot of shadows in here. But let's, if we drop the shadows, see it starts pulling everything back down. So I might bring them down a little bit. Okay, we're starting to get there. And now we have whites and blacks here. So whites literally will take everything up to white, the white values. And that's just too much. I don't want any real pure white values in here because I don't have anything that I want to be pure white. I want a little bit of detail in this stuff. So let's skip that. Let's go to the blacks. So maybe I can push these down just a little bit, get a little bit more black. And so what I'll do is take this and just until they kiss the bottom of that line there. There we go. And then what I'll also do, he looks a little pale. Let's give him a little bit of magenta. And let's cool it down just a little bit. And you know what? I'm noticing my overall exposure on everything is a little bit brighter than I like. So let's drop it down. So there you go, guys. That's nothing stylized. But what we did is we came from this, where all of our information was in here. And then I was able to, just with these sliders and manually doing it, get us to a really natural, nice, you know, we can even boost stuff like saturation a little bit, give it a little bit more color, a little life. Yeah, that's kind of nice. You know, turn that on and off. That's not bad. That's not bad at all. So there you go, guys. That's a quick and dirty manual grade in Adobe Premiere using Lumetri Color. So, you know, all of these things, all these tools should be similar on whatever editing platform you're using. All these tools should be available to you. But you can go in and play with all those settings because shooting in that log profile has saved all that information for you. So all of your information is in there to work with. It's preserved your highlights and it's preserved your shadows. And in the example of this shot, I mean, it really preserved everything for me. It looks great. You know, I don't have anything where I'm really losing information. So I'm in good shape, and log allowed me to do that. And then you can tweak and stretch all that stuff back out to its normal positions and get away from this flat look. And you get something that looks pretty nice. So now let's take a look at another shot. Boom. We have seen this one before, have we not? Yes, this is another pretty much perfectly exposed shot here. And this time I want to show you guys a different way of grading, and that's using LUTs. So LUT stands for lookup table. Basically what it is it's a file that has a whole bunch of code in it that tells your editing platform a series of instructions for what to do to the colors. So everything that I just did to that previous clip, everything I just did to this one with these sliders and blah, 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 and a few other things, and even all down into these, a LUT would contain instructions for all of those different things, and then you could apply it with just a single file. The way that works is, let me show you here. So I'm going to go into my input LUT here. And this is, again, just an example with Premiere. It'll be different depending on your editing system, but I believe most operate the same way. I'm going to go to Browse. And let's see here. Okay, so I have some folders. I like to collect LUTs very much. So I have collections of LUTs. DJI, Daniel Peters makes some good LUTs. Daniel John Peters, you guys should look him up. Both his website, his LUTs, and his YouTube channel. He's got good stuff. He made some Phantom 4 LUTs that I like, so I'm going to go into the Premiere Pro. And so here we go. He's got a whole bunch of these .3DL files, and that's one of the types of LUTs. They also come in .cube, and I forget what the other ones are, but it's basically 3D LUT. And so he's got one P4 base. So let's try Phantom 4 base, and let's see what that looks like. And we click apply. Boom. Look at that. So in just one click, that LUT took us from this to this. That looks great. But with this shot, one of the things that I really liked is that I had all of this information in the shadows. So what I want to do is I want to get that back. This LUT has done a little too much for me. And that's the good thing about LUTs, is that you really shouldn't just use them as a one-click solution. You should go in and modify them. So what I want to do is, let's go in here. So these are my shadows. Let's see if I can bring my shadows up a bit. And boom, look at the side of that mountain starting to open up. But now everything's starting to get a little washed out because I'm bringing up a lot of stuff. So, and I've raised us up off of here. I do want to bring it down a tad. So there we go. We've got a little bit of detail in here. And we've really opened up the shadows in the face of this here. So if I reset these, so let's take a look. Boom. We lose a lot in here. So yeah, let's boost the shadows a bit just to get some detail in here. And let's drag those blacks out so we get some of that contrast back. And then we can give them a little bit of saturation. And there we go. Pardon the burp there. The beer's getting to me. So there we go. So we went through, we applied a LUT, and then we did some modifications of our own to use the LUT and to make it work for us and for a particular shot, because no LUT is going to be a one-click solution for every single shot. There are ones designed for different cameras, like these were made for the Phantom 4 by Daniel Peters. I have GH5 LUTs and all that stuff. Yes, they are made to work specifically with each camera's sort of different log profile and how they handle colors, but no one LUT is just going to work on every single shot immediately. Just click and everything looks great. So keep that in mind. They are not a magic solution. So there we go. Come on out. So there we go, guys. I think that's pretty much everything that I had to share with you tonight about shooting in log. So we can recap real quick. You know, log stands for logarithmic curve. And it means that your camera is not capturing brightness values linearly, but rather in a logarithmic curve. So it's boosting the shadows up a little bit, and it's also arcing over and holding those highlights down so that you can fit more into the dynamic range of your camera's sensor. So that has pros and cons. It ends up giving you a flat looking image, which looks gross on its own, but it gives you the flexibility to grade it and to really get a lot of nice dynamic range. It works best on scenes that have high dynamic range, a lot of bright values and a lot of dark values all within the same frame. That's a perfect time to utilize log. Times not to use log: low light, you're really going to struggle with it just because of the nature of it, and introducing ISO and noise, you're most of the time not going to be very happy with your results using it in low light. Evenly lit, flat evenly lit scenarios, there's no need for it, but you can use it if you're looking to get a stylized look on it, you know, do some tweaking and do a stylized look at the end. Then yeah, you can do it because you're not doing it to capture as much information as possible. You're doing it so that you have the flexibility in grading. And yeah, so that is another thing, is that you will need to grade, whether you do it manually or if you use LUTs, but you're going to have to grade it because log footage coming out just does not look appealing. So there we go, guys. Let's see if we got anything up here in the chat. John, thank you very much. Hitting the bell, that notification bell. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks for coming by and being a part of the show. And anybody else out there, I encourage you to come and be a part of these live shows as well. So I'll, if anybody has any remaining questions or comments on log or anything like that, please feel free to pop them in the chat and I'll get to them. But otherwise, I'm going to start winding us down here. Like I said, I am doing these live shows every week on Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Obviously, it is not 1 p.m. Eastern Time today. We had some technical difficulties on the YouTube side. Yes, I will blame them. We didn't get to, I wasn't back home to be able to start the stream until late, but I appreciate you guys who did tune in and stick with me at this later hour on a Saturday night. But next week, barring any huge technical difficulties, we will be live again at 1 p.m. on Saturday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And next week, we have a topic lined up. I know you guys saw that a lot of the examples that I was showing this week were drone shots, and I do a lot of drone flying and a lot of drone filming. So we are going to talk about shooting video with drones. That will be next Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, guys. So shooting with drones, I'm going to go over the drone options that are out there currently, some of the most popular ones. I'm going to go over the legal requirements and legal issues with flying and filming with drones. And I'm going to go over some of the tips and techniques so that you can get high quality cinematic footage while you are legally flying your drones. So make sure to subscribe to this channel and do like John did there and hit that notification bell so that you guys can be reminded next Saturday afternoon, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, when that show begins, and you can come in and join me live and comment and question and try and derail me or just hang out or do whatever it is you guys would like to do, because that is the fun of live shows and that's why I love doing them. So guys, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. I hope this information helped you guys out. If you had any questions, feel free to share this video if there's anybody out there who you think could benefit from this information. And if you have any comments beyond this this live show, if you're watching it later, feel free to leave them down below. I do check and read and try and respond to all of the comments on my videos. So continue the conversation even though the live broadcast may have come and gone without you. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to finish this beer and hopefully a few more and enjoy my Saturday night. I really appreciate you being with me. I know I've said that so many times, but I feel like I can't say it enough. You guys take care, and I will see you guys next Saturday.